Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's module on assessment. Because I think assessment is such a crucial part of your instruction, that it actually, if done correctly, should drive everything you do, I wanted to create a video in which I did three things. First, to review the terms of assessment. There's a lot of jargon in this field, and I want to review some of the key terms. Second, I want to talk about how we plan for assessment. And third, I want to discuss the implications for middle level learners in particular. What kind of assessments do we want to shoot for and why for this developmental age? So, first thing, what assessment is not? Assessment is not something we tack on to learning. The first year, for instance, that I taught at the middle school, I did a whole unit on the Diary of Anne Frank. We performed the play in class, and then what I did was scurry off down the hall to my friend Carol's classroom and borrow her test, which I gave my students, and they turned in. Effective assessment is not that. In the first place, we probably talked about different things in that play in my class than in my friend Carol's, and so it wasn't fair. The second thing is it wasn't lined up with any goals in particular. And so my students were just basically illustrating maybe a surface level understanding of that play at best. So, first thing, assessment is something we just throw on at the end of a unit. The second thing assessment is not is synonymous with e-test. In today's testing culture, sometimes people think they're the same thing, when in fact, assessment is so much more. Assessment, in fact, is a process. And it's not just any process, but it is the art of observing a student behavior and being able to make inferences about what that student knows based on that behavior. We can't really open up our students' heads and look inside to see how much they know. The only thing we can really do is make inferences based on what they say, what they write, what they do. And so good assessment is the art of making valid inferences. The other definition that I like quite a lot is the one that is in your book, which is assessment as a way to sit beside a student. Think about this class, for instance. It's online. I don't get to see you in real life, but what I can do figuratively is read your Sunday night syntheses and your discussion posts, and I can think to myself, based on the specificity of that response, based on what they're talking about and how from the chapter material and videos, what can I infer about how much they know and the quality of that understanding? So it's really quite an art, and figuratively speaking, you really are sitting beside that student insofar that you can. The other thing I want to talk about, because it's so important, is how assessment should be linked to your goals and standards. Not like my other example, in which I tack something onto learning. If you link your assessments to your goals, you will have assessments from which you can draw valid inferences. When we talk about validity in assessment, we're really talking about that the tool measures what it's supposed to measure, that you get on the scale and it is actually measuring your weight and not your IQ. Another example from my past is teaching my 8th graders the short story by Mark Twain, The Celebrated Frog of Calaveras County. The problem with my assessment for that was I had them make paper origami frogs at the end. Now I can tell you that 8th graders love to do that, but I also can tell you that there was no valid way that that hooked up to any goals or standards whatsoever. So what you want to do is aim for high content validity, which is that whatever task you give your students, it lines up with the goal that you have. The other thing you want it to have is reliability, and your book talks about this a little bit. That means that you have a tool that helps you be fair and consistent. For instance, if I make a really good assessment tool for a student essay in my class, students should get the same grade in my class as they get from my friend Carol's class. It helps us be consistent and fair. So those two things are really important. And if you haven't added those two terms to your vocabulary, I hope you do. They are terms that help you sound like and be a professional. The next thing I want to mention is how you map those things backward from your goals. You should always start with your goal. Make your task next. What do you want students to be able to do? And then figure out a way to get them there. For instance, if I was going to fly my small airplane to Florida, I would want to know precisely the town in Florida. Maybe I want to go to Tampa. I want to know precisely where I'm going before I set off. I want to get out my maps. I want to draw my line. I want to see what my magnetic heading is and my true heading and all of those things. And then if I get off course because of wind or weather, or if I have to stop overnight and take a break, it doesn't matter because eventually I'm getting to Tampa. The problem with a lot of assessment in schools is it's not leading you anywhere in particular. And so something you really, really want to be aware of is where you want students to go. And there's different ways of getting them there. And so I want to talk briefly about kinds of assessments you can ask for. The first kind is paper pencil tests. That's anything in which you measure student understanding through writing. It can be short answer, it can be fill in the blanks, it can be constructed response, but that's just one way of measuring knowledge. Another way of measuring knowledge is through performances, like projects, speeches, presentations, games, and other performances like portfolios, wherein students collect artifacts to make certain conclusions about their own learning. So performance tasks, they're usually multifaceted and they're usually much more complex. The other thing I want to say is that if you want your assessments to promote learning and not just measure it, you want to give performance tasks, especially for students in the middle levels. What we know of student development at this age is that if you want to promote higher order thinking, and when I say that, I'm talking about Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis and creativity and application, all of those ways in which we engage with material in more sophisticated ways than simply recalling facts, then you really want to use performances. Not just because they're going to measure a cluster of activities and they're more engaging, but because they're linked to motivation. And this is something that your textbook does not say, but that is true. What and how we learn is a product of how we are assessed. Think about this. If all you are doing in, say, a biology class is reading the textbook and filling in the blanks on the study guide, imagine how much you're going to know, as opposed to if you end up dissecting pig hearts and discussing the different parts of the circulatory system. Think about the different levels of understanding that go into those tasks. Think about this, for example, as well. Say you're in my health class and you know that the only way I'm going to measure your understanding of nutrition is by a multiple choice test on the food pyramid. Think about what you need to know to be able to be successful on that assessment. You could do it mostly on factual recall and a little comprehension. But if I asked you to devise one lunch for school lunch that would actually be used in your school cafeteria, the cooks would actually make it, if your lunch was, first of all, a healthy lunch, and second of all, a popular lunch, meaning that students would actually eat it. And you had students either as individuals or as groups construct these lunches based on what they know. Think about all of the skills that go into that performance. So what I'm urging you to do as you think about going into the middle level classroom, or as you think about refining your methods in the middle level classroom, is how can you construct performances that not only make valid inferences about what students know, but that help them motivate them to do something, that are authentic. In other words, that they have real world applications, that they're interesting, that they're playful, that they're fun. That's worth doing. And so I'd like you to think about those things, especially as you're looking at the examples in the textbook, and sort of think to yourself, what could I use here? How could I make this playful? How could I make it engaging and active for middle level methods? Those are the things I'd like to you to think about as you start to prepare your synthesis this week. And I look forward to your thinking.